My wife left me for her boss on trip to Dubai and called me a joke, but I'd be the one laughing. The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. I knew before I answered it that my life was about to change forever. Not because I'm psychic or particularly intuitive, but because Sarah only called me at ungodly hours when she'd done something that would require an explanation. And after 12 years of marriage, I'd learned to recognize the pattern. Marcus. Her voice was different, distant, like she was calling from another planet instead of the Ritz-Carlton in Dubai where her company had sent her for a strategic planning retreat with her team. Yeah, babe. Everything okay? I sat up in our king-sized bed. My king-sized bed now, I supposed, and rubbed the sleep from my eyes. She laughed. Not the warm, infectious laugh that had made me fall in love with her in college. This was cold, brittle. The kind of laugh that shatters things. You know what, Marcus? No. Everything's not okay. Nothing's been okay for a long time. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I'd been dreading this conversation for months, maybe years, but hearing it begin still felt like a punch to the gut. Sarah, what are you saying? I'm saying I'm not coming home. Not to that house, not to that life, and definitely not to you. The words hung in the air like smoke. I could hear music in the background, laughter, the clink of glasses. She was at a party. She'd waited until she was at a party to destroy our marriage. Is this about the promotion? Because I told you, I understand why they chose Henderson over me. The market's been tough and... God, Marcus, listen to yourself. It's always about what you understand, what you accept, what you're okay with. You're like a doormat with a college degree. Each word was a scalpel, precise and devastating. Where is this coming from? Sarah, we can talk about this when you get back. Whatever's wrong, we can. I'm not coming back, Marcus. I'm with David now. David. Her boss. The David who'd hired her 3 years ago at Meridian Consulting. The David who'd taken her on increasingly frequent business trips. The David I'd invited to our anniversary dinner just 2 months ago, where he'd shaken my hand and complimented Sarah on her dedication to excellence. I should have felt rage. I should have felt betrayal. Instead, I felt something worse. I felt small. David Morrison? Sarah, he's married. He has kids. Had a wife. Had kids. Past tense. We've been together for 8 months, Marcus. 8 months. And you know what? He sees potential in me. Real potential. Not like you, sitting in your little accounting office, counting other people's money and dreaming about maybe, possibly, someday starting your own firm. The venom in her voice was stunning. This wasn't the woman who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. This wasn't the woman who cried watching romantic comedies or who saved articles about small business success stories because she knew they inspired me. 8 months, I repeated, trying to process the timeline. Our anniversary dinner. The weekend she'd worked late to help me surprise her with tickets to see Hamilton. The morning she'd kissed me goodbye and said she loved me before leaving for this trip. I know what you're thinking, and yes, I was lying. A lot. For a long time. But you know what, Marcus? It was exhausting pretending to be happy with this. With us. With your complete lack of ambition, your little dreams, your satisfaction with mediocrity. Something shifted in my chest. The hurt was still there, but underneath it, something harder was forming. So what now? You're just going to stay in Dubai with your boss. Ex-boss, actually. David's starting his own consulting firm. He's asked me to be his partner. Equal partner, Marcus. Can you imagine that? Someone actually seeing me as an equal. The implication was clear. In her mind, I never had. We'll be based in London initially, then New York. Real cities, Marcus. Not this suburban wasteland where you're perfectly content to waste away. London. She was moving to London with him. The city she'd always talked about visiting. The city I'd promised we'd see together once I got the firm off the ground. What about the house? Our things. Keep it. Keep everything. Consider it a consolation prize for being such a good sport about everything. She paused, and I could hear her take a sip of something. You know what David said when I told him about you? I didn't want to know, but I couldn't stop myself from asking. What? He said you sound like a joke. A man who lets his wife outgrow him and doesn't even fight for her. Just accepts it like everything else in your pathetic little life. A joke. The word echoed in the sudden silence. In the background, I could hear David's voice, deep and confident, saying something that made Sarah laugh. I have to go, Marcus. David's arranged a surprise for me. Something about a business opportunity in Monaco. Can you imagine? Monaco. While you're there calculating tax returns for Mrs. Henderson's pet grooming business. She knew about Mrs. Henderson. I'd mentioned her exactly once, 3 months ago, as an example of the diverse client base I was building. Sarah had filed it away like ammunition. I'll have lawyers contact you about the divorce. Try not to make it difficult, okay? For old time's sake. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark for a long time, holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. Outside, our neighbor's dog was barking. The same dog that barked every night at 3 a.m. The same sound that had annoyed me for 2 years but that I'd never done anything about. Just like everything else in my life, apparently. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, and made lists. It's what I do when the world stops making sense. I organize chaos into neat columns and bullet points, as if structure on paper can somehow restore order to reality. List 1. Immediate concerns. Cancel joint credit cards. Contact mortgage company. Inform employer, bereavement leave. Call lawyer. List 2. Sarah's cruelties in order of impact. 1. You're like a doormat with a college degree. 2. Your complete lack of ambition. 3. Your satisfaction with mediocrity. 4. You sound like a joke. 5. Your pathetic little life. I stared at the second list for a long time. Each item was a mirror, reflecting something I'd been afraid to see about myself. But mirrors don't lie, even when you wish they would. At 6:30 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Jake. Coffee? You sound terrible. I didn't remember calling him, but apparently I had. At 4:17 a.m., according to my call log. The conversation was a blur, but Jake had always been good at reading between the lines. Café Luna, 7 a.m., I texted back. Jake was already there when I arrived, occupying our usual corner booth with 2 large coffees and an expression of barely controlled fury. He'd known Sarah almost as long as I had been the best man at our wedding, had spent countless evenings listening to her complain about everything from my career choices to my weekend clothes. So she actually did it, he said as I slid into the booth. You knew. I suspected. The last few times we all hung out, she kept mentioning David. David thinks this, David says that, David took the team to that new restaurant. I figured she either had a crush or was already in too deep to see straight. Jake owned a small construction company, the kind of unpretentious success story that made practical sense. He'd started with a pickup truck and a toolbox, and now he employed 12 people and owned more property than most investment bankers. Sarah had always been polite to him but never impressed. Blue-collar work, she'd once called it, not quite quietly enough. 8 months, I said. She's been lying for 8 months. And you never suspected? I wanted to say no, but that would have been another lie in a world suddenly full of them. Maybe. Probably. I kept explaining it away. She was working hard, building her career. I was proud of her. While she was tearing you down behind your back. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Jake raised an eyebrow. When am I not honest? Am I a joke? The question hung between us like a challenge. Jake was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee with deliberate precision. You want the truth? I asked for it. You're not a joke, Marcus. But you've been acting like one. The words stung, but I'd asked for honesty. Explain. You're brilliant with numbers. You have an MBA from Northwestern. You could have been running your own firm 5 years ago, but instead you've been hiding behind excuses and playing it safe. And Sarah. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Sarah's been using your caution as a weapon against you for years. She supported my decision to take the job at Hartwell and Associates. She said stability was important while we built our foundation. She said a lot of things, man. But did you ever notice how she only said them when other people were around? When it was just us, she spent half the time talking about what other people were accomplishing. I had noticed. I'd just chosen to ignore it. So what do I do now? Jake leaned back in his seat and smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile he wore when he was about to demolish something that needed demolishing. Now you stop being safe. Now you stop making excuses. Now you stop letting people treat you like you're less than you are. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling. And now you start proving that David Morrison and your ex-wife made the biggest mistake of their professional lives. What are you talking about? He turned his phone toward me. On the screen was a news article dated 2 days ago. Meridian Consulting under federal investigation for tax fraud. I read the headline twice before the implications sank in. David's company is in trouble? More than trouble. Look at this. Jake scrolled to another article. 3 of their biggest clients have pulled contracts in the past month. Their stock price has dropped 40%. And according to my buddy who works at the SEC, this is just the beginning. Sarah didn't know. She couldn't know, or she never would have left with him. She jumped ship just as the ship was starting to sink. There's more, Jake said, his smile widening. Remember that tax consulting certificate you got last year? The one Sarah said was a waste of time. I'd almost forgotten about it. Advanced International Tax Strategy Certification. I'd taken the course out of curiosity, thinking it might help me better serve clients who had overseas investments. Sarah had rolled her eyes and called it playing school. Yeah, I remember. Well, it turns out that particular certification is about to become very valuable. All these companies that are losing trust in big consulting firms are going to need someone clean, someone small, someone who specializes in exactly the kind of complex tax situations that international businesses face. I stared at him. You're suggesting I start my own firm. No. I'm suggesting you stop talking about starting your own firm and actually do it. Today. This morning. Before Sarah and her new boyfriend realize what's happening to their industry. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. For years, I'd made careful plans and conservative projections. I'd researched market conditions and calculated risk factors. I'd been preparing to start my own firm the same way some people prepare to climb Mount Everest. Extensively, cautiously, and someday. I don't have the capital. I'd need office space, equipment, insurance, marketing. You'd need a laptop and a business license. Everything else is overhead you can't afford yet. Jake pulled out his wallet and placed a business card on the table. My accountant retired last month. I've been looking for someone new, someone I trust. That's worth about $50,000 a year in billings, just to start. $50,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a foundation. And I've got connections. Other small business owners who are tired of paying big firm prices for basic services. You give them honest work at fair prices, and they'll recommend you to everyone they know. I picked up the business card. It was simple, elegant. Marcus Chen, CPA. Expert tax consulting and financial advisory services. When did you have this made? About 6 months ago. I've been waiting for you to get tired of being undervalued. 6 months ago. Right around the time Sarah had started her affair with David. You knew this was coming. I knew something was coming. Sarah's been treating you like a stepping stone for years. I just wasn't sure whether you'd figure it out before or after she stepped off. I looked at the card again. It was real, tangible proof that someone believed in me more than I'd been believing in myself. There's something else you should know, Jake said, his tone shifting to something more serious. About David Morrison. What about him? He's got a reputation. In business circles, I mean. This isn't the first time he's poached talent from other firms by promising partnerships that don't materialize. There are at least 3 people I know of who got burned by similar deals. The implication was clear. Sarah thought she was getting an equal partnership, but David had a history of making promises he didn't keep. How long before she figures it out? If the SEC investigation moves as fast as my buddy thinks it will, maybe 3 months. 6 at the outside. By then, Meridian will either be finished or so damaged that any new firm David starts will be toxic by association. 3 to 6 months. In that time, I could build something real, something that would still be standing when Sarah's new world came crashing down. I'll do it, I said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff. I'll start the firm. Jake grinned and raised his coffee cup. To Marcus Chen, CEO. We clinked cups, and for the first time in 12 hours, I felt something other than devastation. I felt possibility. The first thing I did after leaving the cafe was drive to Hartwell & Associates and resign. Not quit. Resign. There's a difference in dignity, and dignity was something I'd been running short on lately. Robert Hartwell, the senior partner who'd hired me 6 years ago, looked genuinely surprised when I walked into his corner office at 8:30 a.m. with a formal letter of resignation. Marcus, this is rather sudden. Are you feeling all right? You look. He paused diplomatically. Tired. I'm starting my own practice, Robert. Today. I wanted to give you proper notice, but I also wanted to be transparent about my timeline. Hartwell leaned back in his leather chair, the same chair I'd sat across from dozens of times while being passed over for promotions that went to flashier colleagues with better connections and worse ethics. Your own practice. That's quite ambitious. The word ambitious came out like he was diagnosing a disease. Have you thought this through? The market is quite saturated, and without an established client base. I have my first client, I said, placing Jake's retainer check on his desk. It was for $5,000, more than Jake actually owed for a full year of basic services, but he'd insisted. Seed money, he'd called it. Hartwell glanced at the check, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or at least recognition that I wasn't quite the passive employee he'd always taken me to be. Well, he said after a moment, I can't say I'm not disappointed to lose you. Your work has always been exemplary. Perhaps we could discuss a partnership track here, something that might address your entrepreneurial interests. 6 years. For 6 years, I'd been hoping to hear those words. Now they just sounded hollow. Thank you, but no. I've already made my decision. I cleaned out my desk while my former colleagues watched with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Susan from Accounts Receivable asked if I was having a midlife crisis. Tom from Tax Prep wanted to know if this was about Sarah's promotion at Meridian. Actually, I said, loud enough for the entire office to hear, my wife left me for her boss. They're starting a new life together in London. The confession felt like lancing a wound. Painful but necessary. Jesus, Marcus, Tom said. I'm sorry, man. That's brutal. It is. But it's also liberating. I closed the last drawer of my desk and looked around the office that had been my professional home for 6 years. Turns out getting fired from your own life is exactly the motivation you need to build a better one. I left with 2 bankers' boxes of personal items and a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in years. The next stop was the county clerk's office to file incorporation papers for Marcus Chen and Associates. The Associates part was optimistic, but I'd learned from Jake that confidence was just competence projected forward. By noon, I had a business license, a federal tax ID number, and a registered business address, my home office, newly reorganized. By 2 p.m., I had business cards ordered, a basic website under construction, and a phone line that forwarded to my cell. By 4 p.m., I had my second client. Mrs. Patterson from down the street had heard through her sister, who was married to Jake's foreman, that I'd started my own firm. She'd been doing her taxes herself for 15 years, but her late husband's small manufacturing business had left her with complex depreciation schedules and international supplier issues that were beyond her comfort zone. "I know you're probably too busy for small clients," she said when she called, "but I thought maybe." "Mrs. Patterson, you'd be doing me a favor. I'm just starting out, and I promise you'll get my full attention." We met that evening at her kitchen table. Her situation was more complex than she described. Her husband had been importing specialized components from 3 different countries, and the tax implications were giving the IRS fits. But it was exactly the kind of problem my international tax certification had prepared me to solve. "How much do you charge?" she asked after I'd explained my preliminary assessment. I named a figure that was half what Hartwell would have charged and twice what she'd been expecting to pay. "That seems very reasonable," she said. "When can you start?" "I already have." By the time I got home that night, I had filled 2 legal pads with notes and identified at least 4 other businesses in the area that probably had similar issues. Mrs. Patterson had given me permission to use her as a reference, and she'd already mentioned 3 other widows in her neighborhood who were struggling with their deceased husband's business affairs. I was building a specialty practice in something I actually knew how to do. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. At 11 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown international number. "Hello, Marcus." Sarah's voice was strained, different from the confident tone she'd used 12 hours earlier. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Maybe I was too harsh." Interesting. 12 hours ago, I was a joke. Now she was reconsidering. What's changed? Nothing's changed. I realized I might have hurt your feelings unnecessarily. Might have. Don't be petty, Marcus. It doesn't suit you. Neither does being a doormat, apparently. But here we are. A long pause. In the background, I could hear different sounds than before. No party, no laughter. Just the hum of what sounded like an air conditioner. "Where are you, Sarah?" "At the hotel. David had to fly back to New York. Some kind of emergency at the company. The federal investigation. She still didn't know. When are you flying to London?" That's been postponed. Just temporarily. David thinks it's better to establish the new firm's U.S. operations first, then expand internationally. Translation: David's current firm was in too much trouble to risk starting a new one in a foreign country where extradition might become complicated. "I see. Marcus, I've been thinking. Maybe we moved too fast. Maybe we should talk when I get back to Chicago." Now I understood. David's emergency trip back to New York hadn't included her. She was alone in Dubai, probably for the first time since the affair had started, and reality was beginning to set in. "When do you get back?" "Friday. My flight lands at 3 p.m. 3 days. In 3 days, she'd be expecting to walk back into the life she'd dynamited 12 hours earlier. "And you want to talk?" "I think we should. About options." Options. As if our marriage was a financial instrument she could trade up or down based on market conditions. "I'll be busy on Friday." "Busy with what?" "Marcus, this is important. I started my own consulting firm today. I have clients to serve." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "You did what?" "Started my own firm. Something I should have done years ago." "Marcus, that's very impulsive. You need to think about this rationally. Starting a business requires capital, planning, market research. I have a business plan. I have initial clients. And I have something I didn't have yesterday." "What's that?" "Nothing left to lose." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "I hurt you. I know that. But Marcus, we've been together for 12 years. That has to count for something." It did count for something. It counted as 12 years of evidence that she'd never seen me as an equal, never believed in my potential, and never missed an opportunity to remind me of my limitations. It counts for a lot, Sarah. It's 12 years of proof that you were right about one thing. What's that? I was accepting things I shouldn't have accepted. But that stops now. What does that mean? It means I'm not interested in discussing options. You made your choice. Live with it. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline. For the first time in my adult life, I'd had the last word in a conversation with Sarah. It felt incredible. The next 3 days blurred together in a whirlwind of 18-hour workdays and strategic planning. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be excited about work, to wake up eager to tackle problems instead of dreading another day of managing other people's mediocrity. Wednesday brought my third and fourth clients, a small import-export business that Jake's electrician had recommended, and a tech startup whose founder had heard about me through Mrs. Patterson's nephew. By Thursday, I had 7 clients and a waiting list. The work was challenging in ways I'd forgotten I enjoyed. Complex international tax situations, multi-state business formations, regulatory compliance issues that required creative solutions. Each problem was a puzzle, and I'd always been good at puzzles. More importantly, I was good at explaining solutions to people who weren't accountants. That turned out to be a rarer skill than I'd realized. You explain things like I'm intelligent but not educated, said Maria Santos, the tech startup founder, after I'd walked her through her quarterly tax obligations. My last accountant explained things like I was stupid. By Thursday evening, I'd made more money in 4 days than I typically made in a month at Hartwell. Not because my rates were higher, but because I was working on projects that actually utilized my skills instead of routine tasks that any competent bookkeeper could handle. I was also learning things about myself that 12 years of marriage had obscured. I liked making decisions quickly. I enjoyed taking calculated risks. I was comfortable being the person people turned to for answers. Most surprising of all, I was good at business development. Not the glad-handing, schmoozing kind of networking that had always made me uncomfortable, but the authentic relationship building that happens when you solve real problems for real people and they tell other people about it. Thursday night, Jake stopped by my house with Chinese takeout and a bottle of expensive whiskey. Celebrating something? I asked as he poured 2 glasses. Your emancipation, he said, raising his glass. And Sarah's spectacular miscalculation. What do you mean? Jake pulled out his phone and showed me a news article dated that morning. Meridian Consulting executives under criminal investigation. My stomach dropped. Is David named specifically in paragraph 3, along with 2 other senior partners? Jake scrolled down to highlight the relevant section. The investigation centers on a scheme to inflate billable hours and misrepresent project costs to federal clients. If convicted, they're looking at substantial fines and potential prison time. I set down my whiskey without tasting it. Sarah doesn't know. Based on the timeline, she's been in Dubai for 3 days while this was breaking. She probably has no idea her new boyfriend is about to become unemployable in their industry. The irony was staggering. Sarah had left me for a man who represented everything she thought I lacked. Ambition, success, risk-taking. Now that man was facing the destruction of everything he'd built through the same aggressive tactics she'd admired. When does she land tomorrow? 3 p.m., you said? I nodded. The indictments are expected to be unsealed at 5 p.m. Eastern. She'll have about 2 hours to enjoy being back in Chicago before her new life explodes. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt something more complicated. Sarah had made her choice based on what she thought was a sure thing. She'd gambled our marriage on what looked like a winning hand, not knowing that the deck was stacked against her. You almost feel sorry for her, Jake observed. Almost. But not quite. Not quite. We drank in comfortable silence for a while, watching the news coverage of Meridian's collapse. According to the financial analysts, the company would likely be dissolved within 6 months. Any new firm associated with David Morrison or the other implicated executives would be toxic to potential clients. There's something else, Jake said eventually. More bad news for Team Sarah? Not bad news. Just information you might find useful. He pulled up another article on his phone. Morrison's divorce was finalized last month, But there's a complication. His ex-wife is claiming he hid assets during the proceedings. She's filed a motion to reopen the case, and her lawyers are seeking forensic accounting of all his business dealings. I understood the implications immediately. If he's under criminal investigation for financial crimes, and his ex-wife is claiming hidden assets, then any money he has access to is going to be frozen pending multiple investigations. Which means Sarah's equal partnership in the new firm is worthless. Even if he wanted to honor it, he won't have any assets to contribute. Exactly. She left you for a partnership in a company that will never exist, with a man who's about to lose everything he has. The whiskey suddenly tasted better. You know what the really beautiful part is? Jake continued. While she was busy blowing up her life for a fantasy, you were building something real. By the time she figures out what happened, you'll be too successful to care. He was right. In 4 days, I'd built the foundation of something that could grow into exactly the kind of business I'd been dreaming about for years. Not the safe, conservative version I'd been planning, but the ambitious, dynamic version I'd been afraid to attempt. Speaking of which, Jake said, I have a proposition for you. Another client referral? Better. I want to hire you as my business consultant. I laughed. Jake, you've been running a successful business for 10 years. What do you need a consultant for? Expansion. I've been thinking about adding a property management division to complement the construction side. Rental properties, commercial maintenance contracts, maybe some real estate development. But the tax implications are complicated, and I need someone I trust to structure it properly. This was bigger than tax preparation or compliance work. This was strategic business planning, the kind of high-level consulting that commanded premium fees. What kind of timeline are we talking about? 6 months to set up the legal structure, another 6 months to launch the first phase. 12 months total, maybe 20 hours a week of your time. He named a fee that was more than my entire annual salary at Hartwell. Jake, that's incredibly generous, but nothing. I've been waiting 3 years for the right person to help me with this. Sarah always said I was thinking too small, not ambitious enough. Well, here's my ambition. I want to build something big enough that when she sees what we've accomplished, she realizes exactly how badly she misjudged both of us. The offer was more than generous. It was life-changing. With Jake's project as an anchor client, I could afford to be selective about other work, focusing on the complex, high-value engagements that would establish my reputation in the market. I accept, I said, and we shook hands across my kitchen table. Partners, Jake said. Partners. At midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Landing early. Can we meet at the house at 2 p.m. tomorrow? We need to talk. Yes. I stared at the message for a long time before typing my response. I won't be available tomorrow. Good luck with everything. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. For the first time in a week, I slept soundly. I kept my phone off until Saturday morning. When I finally turned it on, there were 17 missed calls from Sarah, 6 voicemails, and a string of increasingly frantic text messages that told the story of Friday evening's revelations. 2:15 p.m. Just landed. David's not answering his phone. 2:47 p.m. Something's wrong. The driver said David's company is on the news. 3:22 p.m. Marcus, I need to talk to you. Please call me back. 4:15 p.m. This is serious. I think David lied to me about some things. 5:33 p.m. Oh God. Marcus, please. I made a terrible mistake. 6:41 p.m. The FBI raided Meridian's offices. David's been arrested. 7:28 p.m. I'm at the house. Your house. I know you're angry, but please let me explain. 8:55 p.m. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. 11:17 p.m. I have nowhere to go. David's assets are frozen. The company credit cards don't work. 12:43 a.m. Marcus, I know I hurt you, but I need help. Please. The voicemails were worse. 6 increasingly desperate recordings of Sarah crying, apologizing, begging for forgiveness and assistance. The confident woman who'd called me a joke 3 days earlier was gone, replaced by someone who sounded lost and frightened. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt tired. At 9 a.m., she called again. "Marcus, thank God. I've been trying to reach you." "I know. I got your messages." Then you know what happened. David, the company, everything was a lie. Not everything. You really did have an affair. You really did choose him over our marriage. Those parts were true. I made a mistake. A horrible, stupid mistake. But Marcus, we can fix this. We can go back to the way things were. The way things were. She wanted to go back to the way things were, when I was safe and predictable and grateful for whatever scraps of attention she threw my way. The way things were wasn't working, Sarah. That's why you left. I was confused. I got caught up in something that seemed exciting, but it wasn't real. You're real, Marcus. Our marriage is real. Was real. Past tense. Don't say that. 12 years doesn't just disappear because I made one mistake. One mistake. I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. Sarah, you had an 8-month affair. You lied to me every day for 8 months. You called me pathetic and mediocre and a joke. You abandoned our marriage for a man who turned out to be a criminal. That's not one mistake. That's a pattern of choices. I was unhappy. I felt stuck, like my life wasn't going anywhere. David offered something different. And now David's in federal custody, his company's dissolved, and you're stuck with the consequences of believing his promises. I know how this looks, but it doesn't matter how it looks, Sarah. It matters how it is. You gambled our marriage on a fantasy, and you lost. A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. So that's it. 12 years, and you're just going to throw it away. I'm not throwing anything away. You already did that. Marcus, I need you to understand something. I don't have anywhere to go. David promised to take care of everything, but his accounts are frozen. I can't even access the money he gave me for expenses in Dubai. And there it was. The real reason for her sudden remorse. Not love, not regret for the pain she'd caused, but financial desperation. What about your job at Meridian? There is no more Meridian. The company's being liquidated. All the employees were terminated yesterday. Your savings. I gave David access to my accounts. For the business partnership. He said it would make the international transfers easier. I closed my eyes. She'd given a man under federal investigation access to her money. She'd compromised everything, our marriage, her career, her financial security, for someone who'd been lying to her from the beginning. How much do you have left? About $300. And whatever's in our joint checking account. Our joint account. The account I'd closed on Wednesday morning as part of securing my business finances. That account doesn't exist anymore.